Hey BookTube, today I am reviewing Freshwater by Akwaeke Emezi. She is a writer writing out of the Igbo and Tamil tradition. I listened to this book on audiobook, read by the author, which I would highly recommend. Just an amazing, passionate, clear reading of the book, which I really appreciate. This is all about Ada, who is born in southern Nigeria. And she becomes a very troubled child, kind of prone to very kind of violent fits of anger. She comes to America, has a traumatic event. It's a rape, and that seems to split off, bring to a fore all these personalities that she seems to have had with her since birth, which are like sort of the Nigerian gods from this the Igbo tradition. Forgive all my pronunciations. I'm an ignorant white fellow who's gonna give it my shot of giving you my reaction to this book. I'm gonna put this down right now so I can chat. So this book, it is indeed about from conception. Ada has had all these personalities, all these gods within her. It seems to crystallize indeed with she comes to America and she ends up in a really bad relationship, is raped, and a particular dominant personality comes to the fore at that point. It's the first of several that does. Asura, who is freaking fierce, cold-blooded, is described by Ada as being basically her twin, her older twin, drenched in blood. So like really super visceral image. I think the big thing to start off with this book is at the start, the striking thing is that it's not narrated primarily by Ada. It is narrated by the we at the beginning. It's interesting. The audiobook, I didn't have the benefit of having what I downloaded the Kindle sample, and at the beginning of sections it'll say we, and she reads that in the book, but at the beginning I think I struggled a little bit to like, oh, where am I? Which is I love confusion, being confused at the beginning of a book and having to learn. And indeed, after listening to this book, I went back and I re-listened to the beginning, and it was like, wow, it was right there from the beginning. This wasn't the author having trouble at the beginning of the book. This was slow reader doing his best to figure things out. But really, I think for the first couple of hours I struggled, but suddenly then it just clicked and I just motored my way through this book. I just sucked it in. I was totally immersed of this we narration, which then becomes Asura. You get specifically Asura doing a lot of the narration, and it's very much it's like you're inside Ada and you're looking out into the outer world, and you get glimpses of these big events, but it's a really wonderful perspective of someone who is taken over by these beings inside of her, and she is pushed to the background or is kind of tumbled with them. So it was a really effective way of dramatizing that, or perhaps even just reflecting a lived experience, because indeed this book does talk about this being the author writing this out of her own experience, and I will kind of get to that later. So yeah, and I mean, it's such an internal book, which I think in the hands of a lesser writer, this could be very kind of airy, kind of like you're touching in on events. This isn't like a plot where you're always sure where you are. Like suddenly you're over in America and suddenly you're here and there. But Emezi is so good at sort of grounding you and making you feel all of this stuff. And indeed, I mean, like, here's a quote from when Asura is born out of this, this traumatic rape. And it's like, she loved me because I hated that boy. She loved me because I was reckless. She loved me because I was strong and I held her together. I loved her because me. I had known her since I was nothing, since I was everything. Let me tell you now that I loved her because in the moment of her devastation, the moment she lost her mind, that girl reached for me so hard that she went completely mad. And I loved her because when I flooded through, she spread herself open and took me in without hesitation. Bawling and broken, she absorbed me fiercely. All the way, she denied me nothing. I loved her because she gave me a name. And naming will really come up. But there's that sort of that the passionate voice of Asura and the others. And I mean, Asura is this cruel creature who hunts men, and indeed, she hunts and she likes to hunt cruel men. Saying, I just wanted to be locked in a room with them until the air ran out. I wanted to be a monster that kind of lay in my bruises. And it's just that kind of really kind of visceral, frightening kind of stuff. And, there's a lot of, this is a book where there's a lot of like cutting and self-destructive behavior in it, promiscuity, the fun kind of some stuff that's self-damaging of putting yourself in with people that isn't done for pleasure or love or anything like that. This is something that's it's done to try and break this body down because indeed these selves they're like we're here to protect Ada, and we don't think this world is safe for Ada, and we want to take her back. And so, this is very much a book where it travels in both the this Nigerian kind of tradition of the gods inhabiting the thing, and indeed Adam meets others like her who seem to come out of either the similar tradition or branches of that tradition. She can recognize others of her who they can smell each other, which is a lovely thing. Like this is a group of people. This is like there's some sort of a community. While at the same time, it does acknowledge and work when you think about sort of a Western view of what is considered. It's maybe controversially, I'm not going to go into that, I'm not a psychologist, of a condition of a differentiated identity disorder. And indeed, as the book goes along, I think it's fair to say that just for people who are reading this book, I mean, I've already said there's rape. You do discover that the things that would happen to a very young child that would shatter their personality, that does happen to Ada in this book. And, that's obviously, that's very hard to read. I mean, I think it's very necessary and very important to read, but it's there, and it's hard, even if it is. It's funny, the creatures talk about, the beings in this book talk about shielding Ada and splitting her up, and that being a brutal process, but also being a necessary and protective one. And then there's in a way that it's shielding you, the reader, that if this was full bore, it might, for someone like myself, might be too much of something to handle full bore, or would be just damaging to myself to read. It feels like of myself. But I think it's also important to say that this book starts off to take this book as its fictional, as its creation, and to honor its conception, because I think when you're in this book, you have to honor its conception of the world. This is world building fantasy, I guess if you put it that way, of it starts off by the gods narrating this book from conception. So before Ada's even born, and them talking about how they've gone through, there's a gate from this other world, and somehow the gates have gotten left open, and usually the gates should shut, and people should forget about the other side and forget about all these gods that they might carry in themselves, or people. And but so for some reason this got left open, and that's before abuse and what might be considered kind of that Western kind of viewing of stuff, which I think is it's good to hold both of those in your head. And I think it's maybe reflective of somebody who's living in the modern world, a modern Nigerian living in this world of, you would have this older tradition, but you would also have a new and outside tradition, which are sort of both blended in there. And I think that's a valuable thing to have in there. So yeah, I talked about the others. I think it's important to say that, like, you know, this is a book that the dedication in this book is for those of us with one foot on the other side. So and it's a book where it talks about these others. I've said, like, meeting these other people who seem to be kind of equally inhabited by other beings in the book, and how that this book doesn't fall into a kind of a Western medical model of, oh, we have to cure. There's the resolution of the book where it's somewhat programmatic in that I feel like we're kind of falling into slots, and we're getting an ending put here to a degree, but it's enough open-ended that it's saying, you know, I'm not giving away the ending, but it's interesting how it deals with it, and it doesn't deal with it by just saying, oh, we're gonna kill that, and it's just gonna be Ada at the end. And I like that. I like that as something of, we're gonna take this as a strength. We're gonna take this as, this is an amazing, because I mean, that's the thing, is like, you start out this book, it's like, you know, is Ada the victim? Is Ada just like, you know, I mean, obviously as a super young child, you have to say that's victim, but that Ada growing to womanhood, growing to dealing with, like, you know, freaking, she's going to kill herself, comes to something, an evolution that, is powerful. And like, freaking, you know, this is like an amazing woman at the end of this book. Amazing woman who has come to some sort of a something. She's worked something out here that somehow has made her, you know, functioning, made her strong, made her more. And it's interesting. There's a lot of this stuff that's like, you know, talking about, oh, we're not human. We're not human in this book. And I don't know if they're talking about being human, or it's like, we're not the normal. We're not the norm. We're something else. And that's fine. And, yeah, that's interesting. There's also interesting things in this. I mean, there's so much interesting stuff in this book. There's stuff like there's male personality, that are within Ada, and there's stuff about body transformation, both, you know, transformation from a female, very feminine self to a more male or androgynous self, to stuff like just the idea of, like, you know, not interested in having children, which is something that is something that I can plug into. There's many things in this book, and I think it's a strength of this book that this should be such an alien, bizarre, out of my experience thing, but I found myself investing so much in this and kind of seeing it how it touched my own life, even though this is obviously something well beyond me. But just the power of the writing and the being able to ground this so well that I felt, however imperfectly, I was getting into this. I was getting into this mindset. I was seeing reflections of how I do deal with stuff, how we all hive off parts of ourselves, not to this extent, not to, because of this kind of a trauma, but, like, you know, how we all do that. And I mean, I'm sensitive to the fact that this is not me. I'm looking at this from the outside, but I think I'm doffing my non-existent hat to the fact that I felt like I could identify with so much in here, which is a bizarre statement, I think, to make as a white Canadian dude. So yeah. You know, and there's also, I think, a part of this book that it's important to talk about, because there's like the suicidal stuff in here, and which I've really had trouble in 13 Reasons Why really bothered me, and I won't go into that. But this book is like, you know, it's dealing with suicide, a lot of suicidal ideation, and a character who you know, whatever bits, they're bent on suicide. But, talking about like all the, like, that there was like basically 1 year in this book of like a lot of young gay teens who were just whitewashed them, killing themselves and calling it, and it's like, the unseen and hurting ones all leaving together. And Ada feeling like, she was somebody who had got left behind and was struggling to catch up. And I think that kind of, that to me, going in with this thing of the importance of naming, of being seen, of this book is about importance of, I've got to name things. I've got to make you see. I want you to, it's important that you see this, because if you don't see this, we're going to die. Our existence our very existence is threatened, and I need you to see it how I see it, and define it myself to that being powerful, that for Emezi to get this through. So yeah, and I mean, for a final thing, I'd like to just I'm babbling on and on. For a final thing, I'd like to talk about just sort of autobiography versus genre. I mean, autobiography is a genre, and there's a whole thing of this book being written out of her experience, and also being labeled a autobiographical novel, which it's odd. It's two of those things that I can see from. There's a kind of shielding yourself against certain types of attack from the outside. There's the importance of saying, this is my story. This is the importance of me naming. But coming at it from a reader on the outside, that being unimportant to me. I think I talked about how I'm not going to talk, I'm not here to debate or to talk about, oh, is this a real thing in the real world? It's like, no, this is this book. And this book constructs something and makes something beautiful. And that's what's important to me. Me looking at it, and I can see it being genres. There being a genre of kind of the many voices genre. It's funny, you could almost talk about Star Trek and Captain Kirk, Spock, and McCoy being three bits of a personality and a dramatization of that. But more seriously, there is a tradition of these internal novels and having dramatizing internal voices, of writers outside of something like, just the whole kind of a split personality, kind of potboiler stuff you see of people using that to dramatize internal states, as using it as a literary or pulp technique, which isn't to say that this isn't actually a reality. I mean, I think it's a novel, and I think it's a really well constructed novel. It's not her just like blabbing on about, oh, this is how it was for me. I can feel the construction. I can feel the writerly talent here. And this isn't just her taking transcription and shoveling it off. This is a highly honed work, and I want to honor it like that. And I mean, there's also just the genre, I'm saying genre, but the type of writing, like I can see that like, other writers, Nigerian writers, like what have they done using these gods, using this kind of tradition? That's something that I'm ignorant of, and I'm very conscious of when you get people who review science fiction or fantasy books and giving their reaction to it, and saying, "Wow, this is an amazing concept. This writer is brilliant. Where did Cormac McCarthy come up with this idea of apocalypse?" And it's like, Cormac McCarthy kind of scooped that from a whole tradition of that, and he's an amazing writer. Taking nothing away from that, but he's scooping this out from other writers, and perhaps maybe not somebody who's a heavy science fiction reader himself, maybe not is sort of missed the boat on certain things, or maybe he's just not interested in those things. He's a lit guy who's dipped into some science fiction here, and more power to him. I think everything she got thing, but I'm aware of like going, oh my God, this whole Nigerian, these gods, wow, this is so new. And it's like, I'm quite aware of my ignorance there. And, that's one of those things I'd I'd be very interested to see. I'd be very interested to hear about other writers in this tradition and where would be a great place to point off for that. It's interesting. I went to her website. Emezi's website, and she does have actually a reading list, but it seems to be more kind of psychological studies and things like that, or like studies on this tradition. And of course, I'm more interested in kind of a literary workings of this, and I would expect that they'd be out there, and that would be interesting. So yeah, this has been just such an amazing book, Yes, I listened to it on audio. I forgive my transcriptions there of the quote I read, just because that's me rewinding. I probably will pick up an e-copy of the book at some point and do a reread, because I think it's a book that will reward that way. And I can't say that about every book I read. Well, that's a 20-minute review of this book, and I'm going to stop now and have pity on all you people out there. More videos later.